Hello everyone, are you ready for the new video, The Gift of India by Sarojini Naidu? Today we are going to talk about this poem, and it is one of the interesting thing is that Sarojini Naidu was an Indian poet. She wrote many well-known poems, and today I am also going to talk about her writing style, her diction and everything before I head on to the poem straight away. She was amongst the pioneer of poets of the Indo-Anglian literature. She began writing poetry in the last decade of the 19th century, but was highly influenced by the Romantic poets due to her intense reading of the Romantic poetry. She started writing at the time when sonnets, ode, lyrics, these are the different types of poems, having emphasis on color, imagery, feelings and imagination that were in vogue, and that means vogue means in practice, and that was the trend, and she was highly influenced by such writings. She studied ornate poetry which made impact on her writings, as you will see in this poem also. Her close associations with the Rhymers Club during her stay in England lent verbal classiness, musical texture, metrical discipline to her poetry. It has aptly been commented about the striking feature of her style that Sarojini Naidu, as I quote, Sarojini Naidu writes instant poetry where images and metaphors come rolling ready on the hot plates of imagination. Her poetry is intensely emotional, at times passionate to the point of eroticism, and always a spring-like lyricism. In her can be perceived the influence of the British Romantic poets, but what makes it interesting and relevant to the Indian tradition is the sustenance of the twin indigenous sources. She was a gifted artist, having ornamental and highly sophisticated style, as you will see here also in her usage of words, expressions and the lines by which she tries to arouse the nationalistic sentiments. In this poem, Naidu sings the praise of the sacrifices made by the Indian soldiers in World War I. This poem is a kind of a homage. The title here talks of the gift that India bestowed, that is given or giving upon given upon Britain during the critical juncture of the First World War, where they had their shortage of soldiers. So, what made her write this poem? You need to know a little bit of the history that will help you to understand the poem in a better way. The poem talks about a time in the middle of the World War I when India was still under the British rule. A lot of Indian soldiers employed in the British forces fought in the World War for the Allies. And in this war, as a result, many Indian soldiers also died. She was deeply pained, which resulted in writing the poem on such a deep and intense level. So without much ado, let's begin with the poem. Is there aught that you need that my hands withhold? Rich gifts of raiment or grain or gold? Lo, I have flung to the east and west priceless treasures torn from my breast, and yielded the sons of my stricken womb to the drumbeats of duty, the sabres of doom. So in the first line itself, she strikes the tone. The very first line shows India's sentiment of anger in the question that is it not enough that I have given everything? Is there something that you want that I have ever held back? The speaker is the motherland, and the poet Sarojini Naidu is voicing her emotions through the motherland. Here the motherland has been personified, and we can call the motherland as the speaker here. The poem is in the first person point of view, as you see I have mentioned already, and in the figure of the motherland is asking a rhetorical question. That means that motherland is telling that there is nothing that I have held back from you. Here you refers to the British rulers, the colonial masters, that there is nothing, you have extracted everything from me, including the rich gifts of raiment, that is rich gifts of clothing, or grain or gold. Grain means food grains, and gold, all the riches. Lo, I have flung to the east and the west. All that you appreciated, I have given you everything. I have sent my soldiers, my sons, whom I have given birth in my land, who has been nourished by my breasts, whom I have fed in my land, them, my precious jewels, them I have sent all around the world. See, in the next line itself, the priceless treasures are mentioned. The priceless treasures refers to the sons of the motherland, the sons whom I have nurtured, by referring to the word breast, and yielded the sons of my stricken womb. The sons of my stricken womb refer to the youth or the soldiers whom, even though reluctant, was forced to send to the east and the west to fight the war. To the drum beats the battle call of duty, the sabers of doom. This line, this part of the phrase is very important, because this signifies the perish at the hands of the enemies, because the soldiers, the sons that she is sending, they are sure to die. The sabers of doom refer to the swords of death and ruin. They represent the nature of the war and the devastation that it leaves in its wake. So the war is not a very calm and composed one. There will be lot of violence, there will be lot of bloodshed everywhere. In the line, rich gifts of raiment or grain or gold, you see that a literary technique is used to emphasize the extent of help provided to the British in the line. This technique of repeating the successive conjunction in a line is known as polysyndeton. You can write down the spelling: polysyndeton, Polysyndeton, polysyndeton. Okay? Gathered like pearls in their alien graves, silent they sleep in the Persian waves. Scattered like shells on Egyptian sands, they lie with pale brows and brave broken hands. They are strewn like blossoms, mowed down by chance. On the blood-brown meadows of Flanders and France. So this is the second line that we are talking about here, second stanza that we are talking about here. In the second stanza, you see that Mother India is bemoaning the fact that her children have been collected like pearls in their foreign graves. They are strewn there. Three similes have been used where the soldiers are compared to. The three similes to which the soldiers are compared to are the pearls, the shells, and the blossoms. Silent they sleep because they are dead. They are sleeping silently by the Persian waves, on the Egyptian sands, the Flanders, and France. So these are the three places that their graves are located, and that is where they are fighting. They are strewn. They are strewn. See the last of the penultimate line. They are strewn like blossoms, mowed down by the chance, or mowed down by the chance. The comparison of the warriors to the blossoms signifies how the motherland sees them as a valuable human resource, and the comparison is that of a simile. As I already mentioned, that the comparison is of a simile. They are scattered everywhere: Persia, Egypt, Flanders, and France. Pale brows refer to the pale foreheads, because now they are lifeless. These lines, they lie with pale brows and brave broken hands. This lines further intensifies the image of the death and devastation. The amount of loss that India had suffered once the motherland, or once she was bound to send the soldiers to the battlefront. Their bodies are scattered carelessly, and they are trimmed with flowers. They are not even paid their due respect, as they are lying on the shores of the Persian waves, or on the Egyptian sands, or be it the land of Flanders and France. So one thing you will notice here, that this reference to Persia, Egypt, Flanders, and France highlights that these were the major places where the Indian soldiers fought against. One was the Ottoman Empire by the reference to the Persian waves. In North Africa, the reference to the Egyptian sands, and the Western Front, the meadows of Flanders and France. So these are the primary places that they fought. Flanders here refers to the Dutch-speaking region of Belgium. On the blood-brown meadows, this phrase expresses the horrors of the war and the war fronts in a rich poetic language. In the final line, as before the poet moves on to the third stanza, this line, though completely contrasts with the subject is that of the motherland trying to care for her children, for her sons. It poses an apt metaphor. This is a very apt comparison. Okay, you can note down these things as I have already mentioned here. Okay, now let's move on to the third stanza. Can he measure the grief of the tears I weep, or compass the woe of the watch I keep, or the pride that thrills through my heart's despair, and the hope that comforts the anguish of prayer, and the far sad glorious vision I see of the torn red banners of victory? So this stanza is very intense. It is intense and replete with pathos, as you see here. It is totally replete with pathos, as you see here, and these opening lines, as except the opening line, can he measure the grief of the tears, as the motherland is asking the British colonial masters, except that line. The rest of the line, see, they begin with the vowel, and it is repetition at regular intervals, or, and of. So here all of these words begin with vowels. You see that the same word or repetition of the same word or words is known as anaphora. The repetition of the same vowels over and over again in the subsequent lines is known as anaphora. anaphora, anaphora. So the motherland is talking to the foreign countries and telling that whether they can measure her grief and her tears, or whether they can calculate the sorrow of her watchful eyes that are waiting for the children, or the pride that overpowers the despair of the heart. In the third line, or the pride that thrills through my heart's despair, the motherland as if is trying to tell that she is waiting for her children, or the pride that overpowers the despair of her heart. She is despaired. She is in despair because she is losing her sons, the sons who are her children, and that is very pathetic. She is in intense pain. The pride that thrills, here thrill is something that is not very exciting. Here thrill refers to the overpowering emotion, the overpowering excitement. There is a longing for the freedom in the penultimate line as well as in the final line, and she continues to tell that there is nothing but hope that can comfort this anger, this anguish of prayer. What is it except prayer? What can it do? In the penultimate line and the final line, there is a longing for freedom that the motherland craves or desires, and at the same time she is sad because she knows that fighting for her freedom would mean losing more of her sons. She would be sad at the prospect because her sons would be dying for the cause of freedom. The sad glorious vision, it is the use of an oxymoron. The use of banners, torn red banners, suggests that she hopes that it has a successful war of independence that is to be waged by the Indians against the Britishers. But again, the sadness, the despair is echoed over and over again. The victory which will be brought to the motherland will be bright by the efforts of her children. It will be glorious, but it will also be sad, for some of the sacrifices are too great to be replaced by winning. She cannot ignore the fact that yes, she is craving for freedom, but this loss is too much to be replaced. In the fourth stanza, as we move on, we see that this feeling is intensified. This call for paying homage to the martyrs, respecting them, giving their dues, is called forth by the poet. When the terror and the tumult of hate shall cease, and life be refashioned on anvils of peace, and your love shall offer memorial thanks to the comrades who fought in your dauntless ranks, and you honor the deeds of the deathless ones, remember the blood of my martyred sons. So, when the terror and the tumult of hate shall cease, that when the spirit of war shall end, and life be refashioned, life returns to normal on the anvils of peace. So, the here anvil literal meaning is metal work on which metals are struck to make it useful for work. So, when there is peace, when the life returns to normal, when life returns to the anvils of peace, where life falls upon these peaceful circumstances, and your love, your affection, your respect offer memorial thanks in memory of these martyred soldiers. It is being told that after the war is ended, these brave hearts will be given their rightful glory, their rightful place, their rightful honor, because they will be brought back to their motherland and given their due respect. Not unlike the gathered, scattered, strewn bodies or strewn flowers that they are subjected to in the foreign lands. And these words you see that they capture in the earlier stanza 2, if you remember, that they capture the recklessness and the negligence with which the bodies of the dead soldiers have been treated. Unlike that kind of treatment, she reminds as well as expects, you will see in these lines, she reminds as well as expects that they will be given their rightful places as they are her sons. To the comrades who fought in your dauntless ranks, here your refers to the allied forces to which the Britishers, in the army of which the Indian soldiers fought, the dauntless ranks, the brave ranks. And your honor the deeds of the deathless ones, remember the blood of my martyred sons. Here she uses alliteration. Sarojini Naidu here uses the alliteration, deeds of the deathless. In these two lines, the mother is trying to remind the Britishers to respect the respect that they owe to the deeds of her dauntless sons. And this ending line, it is an appeal and also a demand at the same time that they don't forget their duties, as the Britishers had respected them and honored their claim, honored their position, for which they went straight to the battlefield without thinking much. At the same time, they should repay their debt. They should repay their debt of the Indians. The fight that they fought should be duly respected, and that is what she is reminding once again in this poem. So that brings us to the end of this poem, and in this time of national unity, where there is a warlike situation, where we are fighting our own wars also at the same time, it is high time that we respect our martyrs, we respect our soldiers, and avoid war to all possible extent.